У нас был очень вкусный украинский обед сегодня. Вот, но, к сожалению, вторая часть программы у нас не сложилась. По техническим причинам мы не смогли связаться по скайпу с Лемом. И поэтому экстренно решили сделать изменения в программе. И мы сегодня посмотрим несколько видео Марты Рослер, которые на самом деле эксклюзивное зрелище, потому что даже на сайте ее есть только одно или два видео, и вообще это все произведения, которые просто так посмотреть нельзя. И это будет микроретроспектива Марты Рослер, несколько коротких фильмов. А после этого, если мы захотим, то мы можем еще как-то поговорить об этом. А если не захотим, то счастливыми разойдемся. So, Martha, shall I just start the first one, yes? Сейчас выключу, да. «1975 год», фильм называется «Семёнтика Кука».
Apron. Roll. Chopper. Dish. Egg beater. Fork. Grater. Hamburger press. Ice pick. Juicer. Knife. Ladle. Measuring implements. Nutcracker. Opener. Pen. Quart bottle. Rolling pin. Spoon. Tenderizer. U. V. W. X. Y. Z.
What next?
We should probably talk if people are willing to talk about it at all.
Should we have some light or?
Yeah, sure.
This is good. Yeah, that's enough. Maybe a microphone.
Oh,
No microphone. What's a recording?
oh, I
Есть вопросы какие-то? Или
guess it
комментарии?
could be a question, it could be a comment.
Comments? Yes, and I said questions or comments.
How do you feel by your own this work now, after so many years?
Your first question's about me. I'd rather hear from you. First of all, I need to apologize for not being Liam Gillick. So I'm the ghost of Liam Gillick.
Should I have a microphone?
No.
The ghost of me.
I am the ghost of Liam Gillick, so I hope we can adapt to this change in gender and identity. But it would be nice to hear some reactions. You don't have to worry about my feelings. But
everyone's shocked by this aggression.
they're shocked because they can't understand why anyone would do that.
It's fantastic. I think it's great.
Well, thank you.
I mean, young people often feel like that. We all do. No, I'm fine. I finished.
So, okay, maybe a boring question. Why did you make this video? This is a kind of a really retarded question, because it would be interesting to know where it's coming from. Yeah? Because there is so many different things happening there on the level of conceptual art, on the level of semiotics, on the level of French cinema, on the level of feminism, many different discourses all in one work. It would be just quite interesting for me. I mean, I actually know the answer because we've spoken about this, but for the benefit of people that came, it would be very nice if you told us a little bit about that period when you were in California.
New York.
Oh, this is from New York, okay. So, then I need to know something.
The work, of course, is, in a sense, nothing. It's extremely lightweight. It's, there's almost no camera movement. There's no expression. There's no color. There's no anything. There's no set. Everything is minimized, which it's dated 1975. It actually was 1974, but even in 1974, people were making color video, and people were editing video. This is not edited. And people knew how to move cameras and all kinds of things. It was not, I was saying earlier, it's neo-primitivism, consciously influenced, in fact, by, very strongly by Jean-Luc Godard's Dziga Vertov group, which is a kind of ironic thing, because Godard at that period was, and this was very strongly influential from my teen years, he was interested in the semiotics of cinema. You know, what is the language by which the film conveys information? And this is because he was working, as you know, as a teenager himself on the propaganda trains in the early days of the Soviet Union, and trying to use the new language of the 20th century to convey a new Soviet reality, and to do it in a way influenced by futurism, constructivism, of course, so that it was not, it was like the news reels of the day. Most of Russia hadn't seen those newsreels anyway, even though they'd been made in Russia since the end of the 19th century. But it has a different logic. It's not the logic of transparency. I'm talking still about Dziga Vertov, Dennis Kaufman, brother. But rather presents itself as a construction, one in which you can see both the will behind the creation of the images, but also the narrativization of those images. Now, this video, although influenced by Godard's interest in that, clearly is not a constructed work in the same way, quite the opposite. The decision I made, and now I'm just talking formally before I get to the content, was only to move the camera at the point at which you realize the camera is not moving, so that the motion of the frame is highly significant. So I was very interested in the semiotics of cinema and video, of which video is a bad copy of cinema, the worst possible copy at that point, especially. This was in the this was in the high moment of international feminism, where women were looking at the contents and confinement and constraints of assigned roles. But the direct reference was actually to cooking shows on television, not to the life of the housewife, but the life of the housewife as presented as a locale for the striving of women to better themselves and to produce an artwork to be consumed in the domestic space. So, and many of those occurred late at night on television, where you would also see homemade advertisements. That is, rather than paying an advertising agency, companies would actually ask the girl in the office to come in and do something. So you would have car dealerships with the office girl or, you know, whatever. People asking their female employees to be on camera if they were selling a couch or an egg beater. And there were the Ginzo knives. Do you remember those ads at all? Where housewives would be sold fancy kitchen tools to make life easier. So there was a whole repertoire of bad, homemade, but professionally paid for, that is, you paid to put it on the television channels at night. And then at the same time, we had Julia Child, who was the first housewifely suburban woman in the kitchen who had gone to France with her husband. Actually, she was the wife of a diplomat. She was actually a patrician, but a very lovable, tall, ungainly, large, happy woman who, in a very natural way, showed you how to make French food at home. She went to Paris and studied in the Cordon Bleu school, and she taught you how to do this at home. So this was in that moment at the end of the 60s and through the end of the 70s, where Americans were being taught how to have sophisticated tastes, how to consider it important to use spices and stay away from the ketchup and the mayonnaise, which is called salad dressing in the middle of America, and add pepper, not just salt, and in general to make an attractive looking dish. What was nice about Julia Child is that she famously, her kitchen was huge and very suburban, something that city dwellers would not have seen, in fact. But she once famously dropped the chicken on the floor. And then she picked it up and wiped it off, and she said, "No one will know." And it was just this kind of behind-the-scenes naturalness. So all of that is encoded in one way or another in Semiotics of the Kitchen. Now, calling it Semiotics itself was to give an absurdly inflated title to something very simple, but also to say there's a systematic something at work here. Systematic framing of something very ordinary, but in fact, as you may or may not have noticed, it's actually an alphabet. It starts with A and it goes to Z or Z, but at the end, and it's a demonstration of kitchen tools in an absurd and frightful, but very contained way. Before I get to the end of the alphabet, I want to say that, of course, when I made this work, there was no projection, so it was shown on a television set. So there are gestures of throwing out of the box. Here it's very difficult when the norm is to project video to see that the gestures are of whatever, being thrown out of this confined space. And the space itself, it looks like a strange kitchen set. I borrowed the loft of an artist friend of mine because it did have a kind of strange set-like quality. And this is a retro refrigerator, but there was a very similar one in the video. Of course, that it was an old refrigerator. An artist typically bought old refrigerators. And there was a table that gets hacked up and stuff. So the gestures suggest, I call it mad music. People say it's violent. No violence occurs except to the table, of course, and there's nobody else in the room. So this woman is facing the audience. She goes through a number of gestures, and at the end, the gestures actually become the letters of the alphabet, which was for me a way of saying these semiotics speak you. That is, that the pre-programmed activities in the kitchen for women were already something that spoke them, that it was not a chosen role, and that no matter how much Julia Child, the media, the whole structure of married life, of growing up female, was to say, you can be arty about this, you can be a good cook, you can be wonderful, but you cannot not cook. And especially I was very interested at that point, and I did a number of works about women in different relationship to production and consumption, but it was very clear that the aspirational role and the bourgeois role was that the woman was both producer and consumer, and that there were no servants or helpers, that one cooked. The nuclear family, it wasn't you and your mama, it wasn't you and your cousin, it was you. And in particular, if you were married to a businessman, you were expected to entertain guests and to produce some version of this amplified fancy cuisine. So as I said, it was consciously, I made it as a primitive looking thing. A lot of my work at that time was very primitive looking, and in particular here, there are no fancy tools. For example, this is the Cuisinart moment where you would have blenders and, you know, fancy electronics. No. Everything there is the stuff from the previous moment when our mothers didn't really know how to be sophisticated. And again, I was trying to call attention to, first of all, the fact that this was about a woman and a tool, and that these tools had specific purposes. It was not about electrified, you know, fancy stuff, but rather the tool. And then the tool, of course, the gestures suggest that the tools have other uses as well, which is a kind of a, as we see from the shrug at the end, a kind of a simply imaginary way of stepping out of the role. Stepping out of the role does not consist of, you know, stabbing with a knife or, you know, making strange gestures with pans or rolling pins, but something else. But it is, the work at the time that I did, I often called a burlesque. That is, it referred to things, but in a clown-like fashion. So that's my answer to your question.
Yeah, so, okay, we actually never had this detailed conversation before, yeah, and obviously cooking and kitchens are quite significant for me. So, I saw this new film about Julia Child, the terrible, terrible Hollywood movie. I watched it, yeah, and with Meryl Streep, who is a great actress, yeah. But the interesting thing there, even in a horrible movie like that, Julia and Julie, exactly. Even in like horrible, stupid films like that, there are certain moments that are actually rather interesting, and then there is a kind of a discussion of Julia Child because she tried to publish her cooking book several times unsuccessfully, yeah, and the failure was primarily class-based, yeah, that the publishers felt that French cooking and European cuisine is largely developed for the upper class, yes, so the woman of the household, the wife, will never actually cook herself. Right? It will be servants who cook. The cook cooks, yeah, not the wife of the, yeah. So the kitchen was kind of invisible, yeah. And actually, if you see in European architecture, you never, this concept of an open kitchen, yeah, this is something else. Like, for example, what we have here, which is now, with the rise of the new bourgeoisie and this whole kind of class, right? Everybody wants to have this open kitchen that you could cook and entertain. So there is a gender discussion in making cooking visible, as you're doing in this film, but there is also a class conversation there. Maybe you have something to say about that as well.
I was trying to talk about that the bourgeois housewife, the middle class in the US was growing enormously after the war. Wages were rising, and even people who were in fact working class called themselves middle class because class in the US was based on income categories and your purchasing power. And of course, if you have purchasing power, you have to purchase things. So the idea was, well, if we have these women at home, we should teach them to want beautiful homes and to have nice curtains, but also to cook. So this was the point at which a whole new genre of cookbooks had emerged, and in fact with color photography, which made a huge difference. And Time magazine put out a big coffee table series with the food of many different lands, all of which you were supposed to master. And of course, the word master is very appropriate. Of course, it's the wrong gender, but Julia Child's book was called Mastering the Art of French Cooking, and it was, in fact, directed at middle-class women because they were the producers and the consumers, unlike the upper-class people who, of course, never stepped into the kitchen except to ask the cook what's for dinner. So that's my answer, is that this was the point at which the middle-class woman was supposed to take on all the qualities of a good servant, which eventually the middle class solved, not by takeout on the one hand, ordering food and bringing it home, and hiring nannies to take care of their children. And that solved the servant problem. That is, there's a whole new class of servants, most of whom have faces that differ from the faces of the women who employ them. You're not convinced?
That's okay.
Maybe somebody else.
I don't want to monopolize.
Спасибо. I also have a question about semiotics of the kitchen. Did you intended that these tools, which are quite like kind of old-fashioned, since it is not combiners and oil electrotechnical things, did you meant that it could be look like an arsenal of cold arms, like a mean of defense or revolt or something like that?
Yes, especially because they were devoid of that. Yes, they were devoid of the sheen of the appliance, something you plug in the wall and it does it all for you. You had to do it. You know, if you're going to chop, you have to chop. If you're going to cut, you have to cut. If you're going to roll, you have to roll. And there's no magic genie in the machine that does it for you. And so, and of course, they're made out of metal, like other tools and weapons. So yes, of course, they were meant to move your mind away from the glamorous kitchen of today, of 1975 or 4, and to think rather about an arsenal of tools which also possibly have a flickering suggestion of other uses, which is very apparent from somebody using a knife like this, which is completely inappropriate to a kitchen, but maybe for killing a pig or something.
Does it work? Yeah, I wanted to ask again about these last 4 letters. You already explained that you wanted to show some, 6 letters, okay. But was it like really intentional, or it was just a solution when you ran out of?
Or why
like,
would you can always find something.
No, I mean, because rhythmically it's very successful, and it's like you're saying it very quickly, and in the whole composition it's a very good ending. Did you think of that in that way?
Of course. I could show you my notebook page, which I've reproduced, that shows the letters, and there's nothing at UVWXYZ. There's just the letters.
So it was from the very
very beginning.
Okay.
Yes. It's an interesting question because it suggests that you're having a little trouble not seeing this as a spontaneous outpouring, which I like very much because that's what it's supposed to seem like. But in fact, it wasn't, and this wasn't the first take. And yes, it was planned from the beginning that it would be an alphabet that would be unannounced, and it would be noisy.
There is a very beautiful sequence in Godard's Le Chinois, right, where he talks about La Chinoise. My French pronunciation is terrible. Where he wants to kind of show this idea of Brechtian theater, yeah, and there is this young man whose head is completely covered in bandage, yeah, and he's speaking, reciting something about some demonstration, yeah, and how they were attacked by, I don't know, Trotskyists or something like that, yeah. And he's slowly opening up his bandage, and of course you're expecting to see blood, but then it's just his normal face, and there is nothing, yeah.
Right.
For some reason, this is like the very, very close reference for me to your film, that the sensibility is very similar. It's not really a question, it's more of a comment. Yeah.
Thank you for mentioning Brecht, because I would say, I don't know if I'm supposed to be using this. Oh, thanks. Oh, I would characterize myself at that point and to this day as a Brechtian. And what that means is that I'm actually an anti-expressionist. And I like to freeze things rather than to have them, you know, make you crazy with motion. That I prefer that the text speak rather than that you believe what you're seeing, and that in effect the characters are there as characters producing a text. And this is true of many of the works I've done. There's a strange thing where the will to believe, though, is often so strong that I was being interviewed by a film student, a film critic, and we were talking about a work I made about a woman, a girl who starved herself to death. And I used very young actors, and they were very stilted. And the camera angle was very stilted and strange. And I was explaining how I purposely chose, they would be declaiming these texts that, you know, were kind of building a whole series of different arguments about starvation, and that I used young people. And she said, oh, I thought they were really the parents of, I mean, it was impossible. But somehow this, I guess the woman who interviewed me, now I think about it, was actually anorexic herself. And so she projected so much onto this that even every effort that I had made to have something that looked absolutely as a stage set, staged by people who were not actually that appropriate for the role, it didn't matter. Her mind leaped into the content and said, yes, this is real. But the point about Brecht for me is this anti-Aristotelian insistence that what work is supposed to do is not to offer you a cathartic exit from the problem, but to rather invoke in you the desire to think further. That is, that you carry the problematic of whatever it is out the theater door. So for me, if a work is resolved at the end, it's not really successful. It should take your mind somewhere else.
So the other, I mean, relating, is this working? Yeah. The other peculiar thing about this video relating to what you were saying, yeah, is that there are all of these reenactions of this particular work, yeah, reenactments, yeah, which is something that I've never experienced with virtually any, I can't think of any other art video piece that people would want to restage for themselves, yeah. Would it make sense to just see one quickly, because there are some on Facebook?
Well,
would you like?
Semiotics of the Kitchen Barbie.
Exactly.
She spells my name wrong.
Nikolai, can we go to YouTube on this computer? And if you type in semiotics of the Kitchen Barbie.
So you've seen it.
Yeah.
Great.
If you look on, if this is the same person who made these videos.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so if you go to the top and you look under 20 videos. Down there. Maybe.
That's it.
This
no,
one?
That's one I don't know. Twisted Fibers. Maybe that's what she's calling it now. Let's see that one. Yeah, it is. It is. She is calling herself.
2011.
Yeah. That's only last year.
Can you make it full screen?
I love this one. There are lots of really nice ones, but this one is...
With your picture on the back, yeah?
Yeah, David.
Ice cake.
It's like a sword. She gives a little plug at the end to the, of course, it's like I said, she spells my name wrong, very common misspelling. But I thought that was totally great. I did a, what?
Is the microphone working? No? Oh.
It's on.
Let's try
I
this one.
looked
This
and
one.
the
This
green
one.
light's on.
I'll take this one.
Maybe up.
Green light's on when it's on standby.
On mute.
I did a public performance with this in 2003 at the Whitechapel. I was requested to redo semiotics of the kitchen. Whitechapel is in London for their history of performance. And I said, of course not. This was not a performance. This was a performance for the camera, which is not the same thing. It's a video. However, plus I said, you really want me to do in 2003 what I did in 1974? No, not happening. But I proposed to them that we send out a call for a performance called Semiotics of the Kitchen audition. And they selected 26 young women, and together we did it as a public performance with, I didn't do the performing, they did in groups of three groups of, women, and they went through the alphabet 3 times, and then we did the gestures. We all gathered and did the gestural part together. But I noticed that when we were doing the rehearsal, none of them thought of doing the shrug at the end, which I thought was interesting. No one who reenacts it, or most of the reenactors don't, the ones who make copies, don't, you could show that one. I've never seen that one.
It's nice to see a few of them because
Yeah.
there are really so many. It's really very strange.
Yeah. But they don't think to do the shrug. And my quick and dirty interpretation of that is that it's because they take it seriously and don't understand that in fact it's a comedy through and through. It's not just that each gesture is ludicrous, it's that in a way the woman is saying, yes, but I'm still here, so whatever, In other words, it expresses at the end an ambivalence. Yeah. Many parodies.
Why do you think it became so popular?
They're forced to look at it in undergraduate class.
Do you think they find it something like sadomasochistic?
But there are many other videos that you're forced to watch in the undergraduate class and you don't reenact them. You don't reenact Cremaster or something like that, yeah?
So far, all the ones I've seen have been women. And
There is men, yeah, there is men.
There's a man
But
too.
remember the one where it's the guy that talks about you being his retarded sister. You showed it to me. Yeah, the reason why Martha Rosler speaks so slowly in this video is because she's retarded.
Oh, Oh, yeah, the frat boy.
Yes.
Yeah. So that one was made in order to be, to say that's not me. But I think most of the women who do it are saying that's me. You know, that it represents something. When I've been in audiences where women stood up and cheered when this was shown, and especially that happened in very early days, whereas men were saying to me, I feel threatened by this, which I said, you're threatened by a video? Really? That's frightening, especially a comic one. I think that if you choose to see this as representing something in yourself about, you know, being represented and positioned socially as feminine, then you may feel like joining the chorus or joining in and producing one yourself. The first one I saw, women were using technological tools, including the making of video, and the whole thing, it was two women, and it had to do with operating electronic equipment, and it was triumphant rather than a kind of a self-negating something of people stuck in place. And interestingly, that one was done in a bedroom. So it wasn't in a living room, and it wasn't in a kitchen, it was in a bedroom. And that was interesting, you know. Still in the home, but located in an erotic space, in effect. Something else?
Questions?
Oh, yeah. Why don't we see prototype?
Maybe we should see one more piece. I think it's called Prototype. It should be marked on the DVD.
Prototype.
Yeah. Yeah. I did make a video of the performance at the Whitechapel. I just completed it last year, but I couldn't find my copy of it, but it's fun to watch. It's a completely constructed video. It's edited in many ways. So it is a video about a performance rather than being the performance. And I'm often, I really try to maintain boundaries when possible about the difference between a performance, which to me takes place in the space with the people whom you are addressing or bringing in, and frequently, like Alan Capro, I'll turn a performance into a group performance, but there is also clearly performance for video.
Which year is this?
2008, I think.
It's written 2006.
2006? 2006. I couldn't remember which anti-war show of mine I'd made it for.
On the disc it was written.
By me? It's old, popular. It's being shown this week in Hamburg, actually. It's popular in Europe, is what I meant to say. Of course.
Before the video started, you were in the middle of explaining the difference between performance, the interaction with people, and the on-camera video performance planned for the video. And I'd like you to talk a little bit more about this, especially I'm asking from my own context today, in which I do a lot of interactions with people, but I feel a lot of pressure to create what's called documentation of this in the form of video and so on. So I wonder, I guess, I don't know if it, maybe to me it feels that there's a lot of time this line is crossed here, and because people make YouTubes and Vimeos and are always to be performing for camera, it's really hard to keep that distinction now. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about that in your case.
As long as we eventually talk about this, I'll be happy to talk about that. It's a little bit, it's muddied in many ways by precisely as you say, that everybody is performing for the camera at every moment now. I was interested to see at the General Assembly the other day that there appeared to be a live streamer with a small camera and a microphone. That's interesting. Originally, one of the aims of performance was to evade permanence. And so my early performances and many other people's were not documented. The fact that we have photographs of early New York performances at all has to do with the fact that everybody's friend was a guy named Peter Moore, and he took a lot of pictures. And so there's an archive of Peter Moore photographs of early New York performance. But the aim was to, in many ways, there was an artist revolt in the 1960s that took a number of forms. Most of it was anti-commodity and anti-institutionalization, against the commercial gallery system, against museums, against curators, against anything but the artist community talking among itself and with whatever audience who cared to participate. And that's how the happenings began. They were painters who left the studio and did performances. Again, they were not documented except of Peter Moore, and a couple of other people happened to be there. But one of the problems of the new inclusiveness of the art world is that after the artist revolt, by the end of the 70s, the galleries and museums had figured out they better let everything in, because otherwise they wouldn't have enough contemporary things to sell. So actually there was an early effort by Leo Castelli to sell the videotapes of a number of guys who were in the commercial system, from Bruce Nauman to Vito Acconci. No one bought them. But now those are considered, which I find hilariously funny, they're considered pioneers of video because they were the first works to actually be produced for a gallery as recorded videos to be sold to a consuming public, as opposed to the normal way that we disseminated our work, which was in semi-samizdat form. We would put it in a envelope and mail it somewhere, you know, and it was not officially recognized, but rather shunned, because video is not art. And even, so the performances for video were often precisely guys like Vito Acconci and Bruce Nauman, who were famously described as considered an art of narcissism, because it was you and the camera, and it didn't matter if there was an audience. These became extremely popular, and some of them are quite interesting. Or comedies like Man Ray and His Dog, but the performance artists continued to evade documentation until they realized that maybe they wanted to be in the commercial system, and maybe they wanted to be able to have everybody see what fabulous things they were doing, so that the real community, however momentary, that's formed by face-to-face communication and performance, or just yourself, is overrun by the virtual community that you think you're assembling by putting your work on YouTube. And in fact, things have changed. But I'm not surprised that you might want in your interactive performances to avoid having them documented. I did a performance that was actually a public bus tour in which was commissioned, but in my bus tour, the people didn't know what they'd be experiencing. We just went somewhere in the bus, and then I had everybody read a paragraph, and so we collectively performed something, and I was very surprised that the curators had video guys on the bus to actually videotape the work, which I literally thought we're getting on the bus and fleeing an institution, in effect, and actually just creating a performance amongst us. But it was very popular with the people on the bus because they could go to the space the next day and see themselves. And it's like, in a sense, like actors who don't know what the movie's about till they've seen it cut and produced. So I was sympathetic to that, but I was surprised that the curators assumed that the bus tours would be videoed. Anybody want to talk about my little soldier boy? How about you, Mr. Bedokle?
What do you want to talk about the soldier boy?
I would like you to talk about the soldier boy, this work, why, what, anything at all.
It is so clear that it's
Yeah, it's somehow, you see it, you get it, and
Well, I can explain a couple of things. One is that I'll just start with desire, which is, first of all, I come from a war-making country, not that different from your war-making country, in that the place is the same, except at this particular moment it was Iraq, not Afghanistan. And artists, of course, were by and large opposed, like all moral people, to destroying a country that had never done anything to us. That was, the most maddening thing possible. But okay, so I was walking down my main street, and there was a Chinese store there. There are quite a few Chinese stores that on my main street in my neighborhood that sell cheap goods from China. And I saw on the counter inside this toy and a dinosaur sitting next to each other. And I looked at the toy and I thought, I don't need that. And I kept walking past it every day going, I don't need that, I don't need that. And finally I thought, if somebody buys that and it's not there, I will cry. And so I will go buy it. And I took it home and I understood why I wanted it. For one thing, it says God bless America, but it's a bizarre looking character in some unknown uniform that looks more like a Nazi or World War II German helmet. And the features of this guy are vaguely Asian, certainly not the standard Caucasoid American. And of course, the leg. Now, when I saw that leg, I was overjoyed when I rolled up the pants, because there are two signature, I've done a lot of photo montages about the wars we are still conducting. And there are two signature injuries, one of which is visible and the other isn't, for American troops and other troops, as opposed to the other combatants in these wars. And one of them is traumatic brain injury from the explosive devices. You can't see that. The other is traumatic limb amputation, primarily the leg. So we have tens of thousands of returned soldiers of both genders who are missing one or both legs and arms. So this prosthetic leg, for me, even back in the 80s, I used the image of a prosthetic leg as a double-barreled thing, both to point to the wounds of war, but also to the idea of a false leg that has no feeling striding across other countries. And so it represents both the victim and the victimizer. And in fact, I've made a 3-meter high wooden prosthesis that swings back and forth in the gallery and creaks like a tall ship. And it's got Gucci sandals stenciled on the top because it's actually a female prosthetic leg. So I realized that this, and God Bless America, was the theme song of America in the Second World War. It was sung all the time by Kate Smith, and it was the other American national anthem. And it kind of returned after September 11th and the bombing of the Twin Towers. So and of course the invocation of God is this kind of always strange thing in a state that presumes to be secular. So it had a lot of things going for it. Also that it is a miniature, like the miniature teapot fountain that I had in my kitchen and the miniature television. And so it, for me, since I also made this big leg, it fit into this idea that I have of, how messing up scale recreates it creates the uncanny in a relationship to the questions at hand. And of course, it's ludicrous. So I guess I didn't need to say any of that, but.
As for the soldier, I would only want to quote just a very short, maybe phrase that came to my mind when I saw it. It was like marching lame democracy, because this is what the soldier represents. This is what the soldier, an American soldier in general, is bringing to the Middle East. Is trying to bring peace with the democracy, and the democracy itself, unfortunately, is lame, not only in the States, but in Europe and in general. So this is just a small thing that you like our comments. This is I thought that just to say that, and at the same time, returning to the things we said about your discourse about the videos, I just wanted to mention one thing. Just several days ago, there was a very interesting premiere at one of the Moscow's theaters, and the play was called Hidden Perspectives. And the main idea was that two journalists, it's all in New York, the scene is in New York, two journalists come back from the war in Iraq, injured and so on and so forth. And they meet their friends who live their normal, peaceful life in New York with, families and friends and kids. And the main contradiction that they see between these two couples is that those in Iraq try to document, try to video or picture the events while they could help the people to take them to the hospital or something else. So they're doing their own job on one hand. On the other hand, they maybe mishelp someone that may be crucial or vital. This moments may be crucial for somebody's life. And the injured journalists, through all the play, they try to confirm their position. And, well, it all ends in a question mark, as always. But it's just speaking of Iraq, this is one of maybe the plays that is, maybe it's also a sign that maybe today's even Russian public is interested in something like this, because it's the first time that a play of this kind was staged in Moscow.
To respond to that, the question of the documentation of atrocity and injury versus the impulse to help came up the other day as well. It's always an interesting question of the moment at which the photojournalist or even just the bystander decides to be a witness rather than a participant or intervener, and whether journalism is a sacred role that should be protected and above criticism, which of course I don't believe. I have written quite a number of
essays on questions of documentary. Although my work itself is primarily not documentary, I'm really interested in these issues of, what it means for a human being to be creating a record of something, and how, what is the burden of truth and what is the burden of intervention? What is your responsibility to the people whose images you are taking with or without consent, and so on? How do you tell a story that's based on some image taken of pain and suffering and immediate calamity? So for me, this is quite interesting. And of course, this is one reason why I make works like that one that completely evade the issue by giving you a metaphoric field in which to confront questions of war, perhaps, and nationalism and kind of perversity. And like Semiotics of the Kitchen, this one is also a burlesque, in that it gives you a strange, surreal relationship to real questions of suffering and nationalism.
Yeah, I was going to say, I found the video horrifying, because it reminded me of another film from another video from the Vietnam War period called Winter Soldier, in which it was just a film of a Congress gathering of soldiers while the Vietnam War was going on,
including John Kerry.
Yeah, including John Kerry, who helped to former presidential candidate who helped to organize this event, in which soldiers who had just come back from the war or were going back, veterans, were discussing while the war was going on the specific details of their training and of the things that they had to do while they were there. And it was, these details were really horrifying, and they were never discussed. And the film, when it was made, I think in 1970 or 71 or so, was never allowed to be released. It was censored in the United States until the 2000s sometime, when it was finally shown in theaters. But what was really, I guess, horrifying about that film, and that made me think of it with this video, was the way, how difficult it is actually for us, I don't know, Americans, or for us to talk about what happens to people, what happens to the young people that we send. We whether we're pro-war or against war, all the time the soldiers who actually participate kind of become these characters, like the doll, or like the toy. And it's always like, but what about the troops? Think about the troops. And it's always reduced to this God Bless America song, whether we're saying, no, we're really patriotic. That's why we need the troops to go and bring freedom. Or we're really patriotic. That's why we want our troops to come home. But there's no way to actually understand these people as people who are forced to do or asked to do or choose to do horrifying things. So there's no way to really understand that violence. And I don't know, I don't know if there's another way to talk about it. I don't know.
One of the things that John Kerry said in the Winter Soldier testimony was, how do you tell a man that he's going to be the last one to die in a lost cause? It's a slight paraphrase, but that's what he said. And this was used against him in his campaign to be president. And also, he actually won medals and was injured. And the campaign of John McCain put together a group of soldiers who dishonestly testified that he didn't really get hurt and he only needed a Band-Aid, when in fact he won medals for his injuries. So the way First, he was not patriotic because after, during the Winter Soldier, he said, this is madness and this is also madness. When he accepted the nomination, he was told, well, you have to show that you're warlike, so you can be the warlike person to be against war. And he said, John Kerry reporting for duty, which is, what soldiers say, and this was also used against him. So there's never a moment in which you can claim that war is bad until it's over, and then you can say that one was bad, long live war, so we love war.
Should we see one more video? Maybe, which one?
It's longer, but it doesn't, it's actually, it's meant to have an entirely other effect, which is that it's hypnotic, and so you can watch it or not, but if it's too bad to be true, it could be disinformation.
What's the title?
That's the title. Maybe you want to help him? Yeah. Could have shown the Chile one, but this is a kind of a linguistic game, but it's not a game. I mean, of course it's a game. It's art. A game of art.
I'm nightly nerves. In those crates, but today, that they are so.
Oh, you want to stop it? I think you might have YouTube open again because we got a little ad in there. A little advertisement popped up. Or maybe it was Skype.
It was Franco Durante.
What?
It was Franco Durante.
Oh, I can read it. Don't you dare.
It's funny though.
Yeah. So. Soviet! 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 Cuban. Nicaraguan. Soviet!
Or direct recording? Zero. All tape from the beginning to the end.
Well,
And even the music at the end?
Zero.
Okay.
I did not manipulate the image.
So, Martha, is this video meant for television?
Well,
I mean, what was the plan? To get it on TV? Who is this for?
how can you ask an artist who their work is for? Well, of course it can't get on television. It would never get on television. You know this. Because first of all, it's in effect stolen footage, even though I found it in the garbage. But, well, it's an erased air check from the network. When you erase video, video is a cassette production, 1-inch or 2-inch tape. This was a 3/4-inch air check. And you put it into a machine that interrupts the magnetic continuity of the carrier signal. So you get something that the machine, if you put it back in the machine to play it, it tries to reconstruct the image and the tape goes around and then it hits the spot which has been erased and it loses it. And of course that means that because as tape unwinds, the distance is shorter, it's not completely regular. It's irregular because the amount of tape to fill up the loop is smaller. So all the erasures were there, and in fact, it would never be shown on television because, first of all, it's counter-propaganda, and because it exposes the construction of news, in a sense, and because it's ludicrous, and it's stolen. So, so it has to be addressed to whatever audiences I can put together, which, because it was video, was a lot. And, these works get mailed, they get shown in small groups, they get shown in classrooms, they get shown in art venues. What can I say? You want to put it on YouTube? It could be on YouTube. Why did you ask that?
Just curious, in light of our past conversations, yeah.
Okay. So the words that we hear are the words that I heard when I put it in my deck at home, and I couldn't see anything because the 1-inch U-matic deck that I had wasn't the high-end version, which I forget what they were called, that does a better job of stitching together the signal, so nothing was visible. And the sound was murky, and I just was sitting there with a pad going, oh my God, because I had been asked to be in an exhibition called Disinformation. And I had 3 stories that I was interested in. One of them was the shooting down of the Korean airliner by a Russian pilot, which was an extremely strange story about which nothing true was ever said in the US. Since then, there's been interviews with the pilot about the fact that this Korean jet was hundreds of miles off course, whatever. And one of them was the story about MiGs in Nicaragua, which didn't exist. It was a story that was on the news on the evening that Ronald Reagan was reelected to his 2nd term. In other words, it was an announcement of war against Nicaragua, which of course means we're constructing Nicaragua as the proxy of the Soviet Union. But there were no MiGs in Nicaragua, and it took 2 weeks for the government to say to the media, you made this story up. We never told you there were MiGs in Nicaragua. Really. So here, this tape had fallen into my hands, and I thought, well, obviously I have to make a work about this. The headline, if it's too bad to be true, it could be disinformation, was the title of an article by the New York Times during this period when it was very angry that it had been tricked. But the story was about how the Soviet Union tricks gullible third world countries by telling them lies. So the New York Times was doing double backflips to say, disinformation, disinformation, but to actually embed it in a story about the other guy. And the thing that interested me, so it's constructed of 4 pieces of footage. The first is the air check and the ad following directly on it, which is about controlling depth of field and vision, in other words, a camera ad. The next is a piece from Ronald Reagan's State of the Union address where he said, peace is war and aggression is defense, and just this linguistic games. And of course it's fully visible, red, white, and blue, really red and white, red and white. And then I went back to the second part of the air check, the same program repeated twice, so it was a different version. And then there was this unimaginable story that I had taped about Cuba and Nicaragua, which was made up out of nothing. There was no story there. But they got to have a hilarious graphic with bags of cocaine in the Cuban flag, and have an insane graphic of funny dollar bills flying down, and to make all these allegations that made no sense, all of which centered on white powder, sugar refining equipment. How did we get from dollars flying down and the cocaine trade to sugar refining equipment? Well, they're both white powder, you know, so we can just put them all together like this. And the story builds unsupported allegation upon unsupported, just rumors and nonsense. And then we get to see the lovely reporter standing in a little pocket park outside the studio in Washington, D.C. But meanwhile, we got to see a lot of file footage of Soviet freighters and intelligence things. So, and it says very prominently on it, file footage, which means that they just took it off the shelf and threw it in there. And that, in fact, we have no idea what's going on, except it's very clear that the United States is having a war game in Central America and flattening Honduras. And by the way, we're still there, and we're enlarging the Honduras base as we speak. We, the US, helped facilitate a coup in Honduras and supported the coup leader, which was like shocking to me. I heard today on the radio that on the BBC that more journalists have been killed, and that Honduras has the world's highest murder rate, and more journalists have been killed there than anywhere else, and that there was a march today to protest the killing of journalists in Honduras. Just a little side note. And then the last piece, which I also just dropped on, was to me a shocking advertisement for joining something called the Army Guard, which was a music video about shooting people, though there's no one visible that you're shooting, but that's what it was, you know. Jump out of the helicopter and shoot your machine gun. So that was what it was constructed out of, which was this sort of tissue of narratives about war and the bad guys out there and our strong and brave and heroic efforts to defend our country from these people, and to send messages to Cuba, Nicaragua, and the Soviet Union. But what happens in the first part is that if you're not going to get up and run out of your seat, it slows down your attention because there's this rhythmic motion of these words on the screen and the image coming up and going away. And if you stay with it, the quality of your attention is affected by the way you then see the live footage that comes up, which is like an excess of signification. There's too much information in these images.
Well, that's why I ask who is this for, because the video, which actually comes across as a film almost, yeah, in a really strange way, it almost puts like a barrier between, if it was just a typical agitprop sort of, or like a piece, you would want to try to communicate the message as soon as possible to as many people as possible. This particular work actually kind of pushes you away, yeah, which is not the typical strategy for something that only has a kind of a explicit, maybe political message, or, yeah? Which is, for me, quite interesting.
Because?
Because of, for example, what we were talking about, the origins of video, yeah? Like in that seminar that you did in Berlin for us at United Nations Plaza, you spoke about the intention of early video artists, yes? Was really to get on TV, to disseminate information as widely as possible. Or, for example, it made me think maybe just a visual comparison to like Richard Serra video.
Television delivers people.
Delivers people. Maybe it's just as simple as the scroll of the text immediately reminded me, yeah. But as far as you mentioned in your lecture that he actually wanted to have this on TV, yeah, with the expectation that somehow it could get on TV and could have this immediate impact.
Because he's a megalomaniac and I'm not. It's as simple as that.
Right.
He is a megalomaniac, a talented one, nevertheless. I think to be the teacher who gave the seminar, I would say, I'm sure I said some video artists wanted their work to be on television. But for example, Dara Birnbaum understood when she was making her Wonder Woman and the other wonderful works that these were also stolen footage and that it would never be allowed on television. And when she decided she wanted her work on television, she stopped using appropriated footage because no network and no public station would allow, their lawyers would not allow works using appropriated footage to appear because of the power of the media corporations. However, other works I then made, like Born to be Sold, which is about surrogate motherhood, make heavy use of old films from the Prelinger archive, industrial films and so on, because that was on public access, which is this strange thing that's not well policed because the networks feel like no one watches it, which is only half true. Half of no one watches it, but people do actually watch public access, especially late at night. So this couldn't be shown on TV. Semiotics of the Kitchen could be shown on TV, but I also have to make a point about my own work, which is it's always as ugly as possible. It's always as much unlike television as it could possibly be.
That's an absolutely gorgeous film. You know what we just saw. Yeah, it's
you
really,
have
really
weird
beautiful.
Tastes.
No, I don't have a weird taste. I have maybe an art world taste. Yeah, how the flashes of light and the text, the burn. I mean, it's really exquisitely beautiful aesthetically. Yeah.
I'm surprised our technical fellow didn't get up and turn it off. I've had when I still remember this was screened at the Museum of Modern Art quite a number of years ago. It's a big auditorium with a slope and it's projected from the back. The two technicians ran out. I insisted it be shown on a monitor. They ran out of the control booth, raced down to the front and turned off the TV because they were sure that they had somehow erased the tape. You know, it never occurred to me. And so they were protecting the audience from their error of having erased the artist's work. Technical people are very, you know, it's their job to police the technical elements. For example, there was a revolution in television. When television began to broadcast the work, tapes, films, whatever, made by ordinary people as, you know, testimony, and it was always labeled amateur videotape, so that you would understand that this was completely beneath their standards, but that it was there as vox populi, as a witness of the voice of the people. So technically, my work refuses the standards of post-production that the art world was in love with at the time, which is to make the work as slick as possible so that people who are used to looking at television and film would want to look at it. But I was part of the cheap media movement, which basically said video is so crummy that it can never look anything like film. Of course, times have changed. Now, film maybe can never look anything like video. So now we fetishize the look of film, which is usually slightly blurry unless you have a fantastic camera and so on. And we fetishize other technical elements. But, you know, the idea was make the work and make sure no one makes a mistake of thinking this was made by some kind of professional television industry type person. Any comments? Denunciations?
I didn't understand file tape. What does it mean to be file tape?
It's like a file photo. It's sitting on a shelf waiting to be used. It's not an actuality.
Ah, okay.
It's just, you know, we want to say in our story that that the American fleet is being shadowed by the Soviets and by Soviet aircraft, Well, you have to have a picture or something, you say, so you just take some random picture.
Like illustration.
Yeah. Yes, but of course, people who watch television news are not thinking, but wait, that says file photo. They're just saying, oh, look, the Soviets. Or whoever.
Martha, I just wanted to comment on the first, the erased part, as you called it, and the way I perceived it. I think it's a wonderfully, I mean, it's not 80s, it's really today, because it's an incredible illustration of the way our mind today works, because we have so much information from, from all sides, from left and right today, and our mind never perceives the information just as it is, word by word. We only perceive and catch fragments, and this is what stays in our mind. Right. So this is, I mean, when I was watching it, I had this feeling that it could perfectly be news of today, and it could be just the same. Bombs, mix something. I mean, the wording is the same. It hasn't changed in 20 years, in 30 years. Right. It could be the same. It could be Iraq, it could be anything. Right. And it could also be back to Vietnam, which I just found it was really funny, because sometimes the word Soviet with the slash became Viet. Like Vietnam, Soviet, S-O went away, and very often it became Viet. So it could be Vietnam, it could be Nicaragua of, 81, maybe, or 80 or something. It could be today. It's just the way, it's just an illustration of the way now we perceive information, this very fragmental, the way we perceive the world, the way we perceive the news. I don't know, I have this feeling.
Well, of course I agree with you. A lot of my work in the late 70s and 80s was about this fragmenting of our attention. And so I sometimes have two visual word tracks, that is audio and words crawling across the screen, and then something entirely different happening visually, and then there'll be another audio track on top of that, at which point you have to choose what you're paying attention to, which you also have to do today when those things literally all appear on the same screen, not with multiple soundtracks sometimes, but with definitely all kinds of visual garbage at the bottom that you're supposed to read while an entirely other story is being played. So the splitting of attention, which always, of course, produces fragmentary reception, is now much more intense, but it was pretty intense back then. It's what I called the media bombardment, and I was very conscious of it because I'm always knocked back by all this information being thrown at us, and from 1 second to the next. And also American television at this point was using a 1 second edit cut on things, not with the news, but with drama shows. And the advocates for children's television demanded for years that children's television not have a cut that was shorter than 1 second, an edit cut, because they felt that it was damaging children's ability to pay attention. And they won. So it's nothing shorter than 1 second. So I felt very much that, as I think I said, the work was in a way asking you to pay attention differently, so that when the regular footage came up, you would see how overloaded it was as well. So on the one hand, you have the repetitive but fragmented, mostly sound, and then you hear this kind of strange layering of constant propagandistic messages in a very short space, and that's what passes for news. I mean, this is not news. This is propaganda.
I wonder what, I guess, when we're looking at all of these videos and we're understanding that this I mean, I feel as though all of the videos that we've watched today are, yes, all three videos, and including the semiotics, are all telling us, and including all the different versions of the semiotics up to today, are telling us that that what is essentially what is our sensory world, or what appears to be our sensory world, and what is apparently most accessible to us, these gestures, these sounds, these repeated images, are actually masking something, something else. And that something about this masking, or this constant masking, is connected to the possibility of doing something else, the possibility of living in some other way, or the possibility of having some other kind of politics. And on the one hand, I think it's really, great to have this articulated, but on the other hand, it's really also daunting to, I guess I'm feeling the intensity of having this delivered over and over again, going through 4 decades, That's it. That's all I wanted to say.
Perhaps you remember that the last time I was speaking the other day, I said, I'm a describer, not a prophet or a prognosticator. All I can do is describe, but please forgive me for saying what I'm about to say, which is every time someone says what you said, which I, of course, agree with, I always want to say the Matrix. Right? Because that's exactly the message. You're nothing but a battery, and reality is taking place elsewhere, and guess what? It's ruined, Yes. Yes, and of course, that's what's so wonderful about the Matrix, is that it itself enacts a complete distraction, with flying people and all this stuff and people melting into the background. But it's saying, you idiots sitting there in the theater, you're just batteries fueling our industry. And meanwhile, reality is happening elsewhere. And if you don't want to turn into a ruin, but maybe it's too late. I always say, in talking about Occupy, I'm with my friends who are in Occupy. Yeah, I say, what is the strategy here and there and there? And when I stop for a minute thinking about strategy, I remember, global warming, meaning that we could have all kinds of political protests, but at the same time, the biggest threat to human life is just going on as though, I won't say as though there's no tomorrow, but that's literally true. So I appreciate your comment. Yes, I do, unfortunately, have a habit. The only thing I know is to try the patience of the viewer, like the person who grabs you and goes, but wait, and just says, just for a minute, let me annoy the hell out of you with my crazy doom. I don't feel like we're headed to doom. I feel like we ought to pay attention. But what we ought to pay attention to, I think, is not, I don't feel like preaching. I think, could you pay attention, is really what I kind of believe. Because I spent my childhood trying to think whether I am supposed to shut all this out or whether I'm supposed to try to pick my way through it. And I decided after a while that I felt too powerless by trying to shut out all of this stuff, and that I needed to try to work my way through it. And to be slightly less hysterical, I would say, rather than calling this propaganda, it's handy to call, the news media propaganda and so on. But of course, what it is narrativization. It provides a story about all the things that are going on and that we need to re-narrativize. And we don't have to be as hysterical as they are. these are only videos, but in real life, when people sit and discuss and talk and strategize, it doesn't need to be these doom thing, As I heard a rapper on the BBC this morning, he has some crazy name, in Britain, and he's talking about, he in his heavily working class accent, he said something that really struck me. He says, we have all kinds of critiques about political speech, about gender and sexuality, but not about class. So he's very much against the term chavs. I don't know if you know this, but it's an insult meaning sort of very low class, working class, sort of unruly boys, worthless people is what it means, really. I don't remember where the word came from. So the reporter said, well, you talk about trying to moderate our language, but then you go to the working class districts and you call people posh boys and, all these other things, as though that was an insult, though, of course, it is. And of course, Cameron and his whole cabinet are now called posh boys, which is, a devastating thing to say about them. That is upper class people out of touch. But what he said was, I'm talking to you now as a person, and I think that we shouldn't be having these distinctions, but as an artist, you have to do it in a different way. He said, in effect, he was enacting the fact that all the insults go one way and they're not permitted to go the other. And I thought, well, I wish more people could understand that sometimes as artists, we produce things in a way that is not discursive. It's overstated, perhaps. It can be overread. All kinds of things. I said I'm not an expressionist, but I do believe in intensity, which is something else.
Are you often listening to the radio and watching TV? Like you're constantly searching the information, or how it's going? I mean,
I would put it another way. I work best against a background of sound, and sometimes music is more distracting to me than news. I never watch television, and I don't listen to commercial TV or radio. I can't stand the ads. The volume is always higher, and they're sort of, they're yelling to get your attention. So I will listen constantly, for example, to the BBC or constantly to National Public Radio or to WBAI, which is a public station in New York, none of which have advertising, sort of. And on the other hand, I get completely crazy when I hear the crap that the BBC, let alone the American. I was living in Berlin, so I was listening to the BBC constantly, and I'm listening to their version of their nonsensical constructions of some things. For example, their narrative on Greece was like unbelievable. So I have this background because, and I've often wondered about this, it sets up the boundaries in which I operate. And I can't quite explain that. But yes, I have it on, and it's not because I'm dying to know what's happening, but because I need to hear a steady stream of information about the rest of the world, not only about news, but also music and art and things like that. But I'm not always happy with what I hear, to put it mildly. And sometimes things on the BBC are so terrible. The reporting about war, like today about Syria, is so horrible, I just have to turn it off because then I'm frozen. But he knows that I have the radio on all the time. Well, the TV is nothing. The TV?
The sound is on too.
No.
Yes.
No. No. I don't watch TV. It might be on. When do I have the TV and the radio on?
In your house. Yeah, in fact, you have two monitors.
That's like many years ago.
Yeah, if you don't succeed.
Yeah, now I have a computer.
The monitors and the radio station, yeah, at the same time.
I must have been looking for something at that moment.
Any last question or statement?
Denunciation.
Denunciation. Brian, denunciation? Martha?
I have one on enunciation.
You have an enunciation? How about an annunciation?
Well,
Go to heaven.
It was nice to think about semiotics of the kitchen and there could be disinformation together and to think about the way that you use language and semiotics and pull terminology away from its referent. I was curious how you or maybe also how that's changed over the course of your work as an artist. Do you see it as a kind of a concrete or a kind of redemptive approach, or to the content? Yeah.
I'm not a Christian. I don't understand your poetic question. I got the first part, but not the point where it turned into a question.
Have you seen it change over time, the way that you treat language?
I'm nicer to it now and beat it less. No, I haven't actually. I don't think. I'm always interested in what is the relationship of language and image. So the anti-war montages never have any language whatsoever. They're just pictures, which, is strange for agitprop, not a single word. But then my video often couldn't be, for many years, couldn't really be seen in Europe because no one spoke English, because it's so language heavy. But I've also made little silent films in Super 8, which I brought, but left in, I thought enough of that, enough stuff.
It was very nice the way that the words, even fragmented words, were spelled out.
What?
I mean,
rather
than it could be disinformation. So in addition to the audio, there was a kind of concrete. The words became concrete,
right?
Even though
and
they were
at this particular moment in the history of the broadcast image, there were no words on the screen like that. Character generation had just reached the point where you could do it, but the television networks would never do this, and who else was going to do it? But I made another work, which is even more annoying, called A Simple Case for Torture, or How to Sleep at Night. And there, I apparently was the first, if not one of the first people to have words running across the screen, over a black screen or over an image, so that you were hearing someone reading an article about how the United States should torture people, and then the keywords would come and float across the screen. This is the world's most common technique now. But at the time I did it, I was concretizing language by asking you to treat these utterances as something serious, by making it almost a thing. And yet it still is on the basis of semiosis. It's not actual thingness. So I come from a religion of the book, though not that one, another one. So the word may not be God, but the word is what sets up the condition of humanness, is learning to think about words and what they convey and how the meaning could shift and how it could change your relationship to other people and to your world. I'm fascinated by this.